Since February 2015, Nigeria has maintained an inflation rate above 10%, causing a significant decrease in the purchasing power of the naira, a slowdown in business activities, and heightened social unrest. The advent of the Islamic financial system has created hope for stable funding that can navigate inflation. It has evolved and expanded into Islamic countries and developed countries such as America and United Kingdom. What are the best ways to mitigate the effect of inflation on investment and business activities, whether in the conventional or Islamic financial systems? Hello and welcome to the Islamic Finance Weekly, where we discuss key developments on finance, business, and economy from a Sharia perspective. The conversation continues this week as we will be looking at high inflation, how to diversify investment in the non-interest finance market. To share more light on the topic is my guest, Mr. Ridwan Sanusi, the founder of Smart Halal Investor Club. Good morning, Mr. Ridwan. Thank you for coming on the program.
Good morning, Bukola. Thank you for having me once again.
It's my pleasure. Let's start the conversation. Nigeria continues to maintain a double-digit inflationary rate, currently at 16.82%. Tell us your assessment of the impact of the rising inflation tide in the country.
Okay, thank you, Bukola. I mean, as we all know that inflation is the persistent rise in the prices of goods and services, in a particular, geographical location. And if we've been studying the rate at which the inflation rate in Nigeria is increasing, it's quite alarming, right? Given that there are other circumstances or situations that the Nigerian populace is currently facing at the moment: insecurity, the global pandemic, it's still there. COVID is still there. And now we're faced with high inflationary pressures. Now, the best way to look at this is to look at the impact of inflation on a common man, on the average man. Even though, of course, inflation affects everyone, irrespective of your earning capacity, irrespective of your means of livelihood. But it affects the common man more than it would obviously affect, the rich or the wealthy. So the common man who perhaps last year was able to buy one loaf of agege bread for 100 naira, right? It means that, this year, and again, as a result of the increasing inflation, may not be able to buy that same quantity of loaf of bread for 100 naira. And also, given the fact that the earning capacity of many Nigerians are not necessarily expanding, they are compressing. And that would mean that many Nigerians would be plunged into the poverty bracket. And this also speaks to why many people should start looking for alternative investments to augment their income streams. So whether you are self-employed, you are underemployment, it is critical at this point in time for you to start looking for other means of earning income such that you are able to withstand the high inflationary pressures. So it's just that simple, right? You look at the basic items that Nigerians buy, right? We're not even talking about luxuries. Okay, to some people, a car could be a luxury, and we know how high the cost of cars are today in Nigeria. I mean, they're as high as buying a new car. But we're talking about the basic items like bread, like pepper, like water. These things are critical to our survival, but they are becoming, luxury for some people, unfortunately, right? Some people cannot afford to buy a loaf of bread just to put on the table, simply because of the high inflationary pressures. So that's the best way to look at the impact of inflation. You look at the impact of inflation on basic items like food, like electricity, like shelter and others. And again, like I said, the assessment is that many Nigerians will be plunged into the poverty bracket, including the middle income earners.
I agree with you, Mr. Ridwan. The high inflation rate affect the poor masses a lot. And talking about, let's look at high food inflation, which is currently at 18.32%. The purchasing power of Nigerians are being eroded. So how can we achieve a single-digit inflation rate to reduce the cost of living for households across Nigeria?
Well, I think the person that is in the best position to answer and implement, this is the CBN governor, right? But I mean, I would just lend my own little voice to this conversation, right? Because over the past, 8 years or so, since this present administration got into power, we've been battling with inflation, we're battling with, economic instability, we're battling with a whole lot of issues, right, in the economy, which is why, in the upcoming general elections, there's a lot of emphasis on economic recovery, a lot of emphasis on economic recovery because the economy is not where it ought to be, right? So we can say categorically that most of the policies that have been, implemented by this current administration towards ensuring that inflation goes back to a single digit hasn't really worked out. It has not been sustainable, right? And I'll give you some of the reasons, So one of them, is because of the fundamental issues that we have in our economy, which speaks to promoting local manufacturers, right? And we know that there are several factors that can drive the inflation rates to go up. One of them is the exchange rate. So Nigeria is a country that is highly dependent on imported items, right? So if people keep buying imported items, people keep demanding for the dollar, right? It would definitely give rise to increase in prices of goods and services because these goods, most of them are imported. So one of the things that we have to start doing is to go back to the drawing board, fundamental. Go back to the drawing board and let's look at how we can begin to support our local manufacturers, right? And when these local manufacturers are demanding for, FX to buy their raw materials, the government should make provisions for these manufacturers, right? They should, create a special vacuum for them so that they will be able to access the FX that they need to be able to, supply these local goods to the Nigerian populace. That is one. The other one is also, the issue of, our policies, right? So some of our policies do not work in tandem with our economic condition, our economic situation, right? So a classical, case study is again the FX policy, right? Which the CBN, CBN has been working on this FX policy for quite some time, changing, the pattern at which they want to even implement this policy. But you and I know that it hasn't really worked, right? Because there are, in quote, cabal that have really frustrated the efforts of the CBN to ensure that the FX rate doesn't go anywhere yet. But it has already gone anywhere yet. So the CBN has to look for a way to ensure that the exchange rates, right, in the country, right, would not affect the local manufacturers. It would also not affect the people that need these FX to be able to buy certain items that are essential, right, to them. So the FX policy in the country has to be thoroughly looked at, because if we do not look at the FX policy to ensure that it's stable, the inflation rate in the country will keep going up.
An improvement in production of goods and services would drastically reduce the inflation rate and
Absolutely.
opportunities for the unemployed.
Absolutely. And then, of course, to also add to that, right? So we're talking about policies, but there are also some fundamental issues like security, issues. Do you understand? So, for instance, if you recall, about last year when we had some very serious issues in the north. I know we still have issues in the north, but we have some issues in the north where, what's it called? The suppliers of basic items could not go to the north to take the products, from the north to the southwest, right? So those that were able to take, short supplies had to sell at a higher rate. And that's exactly what we're currently facing at the moment, right? So that particular situation has degenerated into a situation where these suppliers do not have a choice but to increase the cost of their supplies, because they cannot go to the north to get this product safely from the northern part of the country to the southwest. And the same thing also applies to the farmers, right? The farmers are being attacked on their farms. If the farmers do not have the means, they don't have the provision to be able to go to the farms, to harvest and get the products from the farms so that they can supply to the suppliers that will bring these products to the southwest, to the northeast, to the 6 geopolitical zones of the country, then inflation on goods will keep rising. So these are fundamental issues that need to be addressed.
The security in Nigeria is getting worse day by day, honestly.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it is. Unfortunately.
Right, Mr. Ridwan, let's look at the banking industry that has steadily shifting away from traditional sources of revenue like loan provisions to activities that generate fee income, service charges, trading revenue, and other types of non-interest income. Diversification in banking. Is non-interest finance a viable alternative?
If you look at our economy today, many of our SMEs cannot afford the high interest rates that are being charged by the conventional banks, and also that are being charged by the so-called loan providers. There are so many loan providers out there today, fintechs, so they give these SMEs loans at ridiculous rates, and they know that these SMEs cannot even afford to pay these interests, right? But these SMEs do not have an option because they can't get grants from the government, right? They need the funds to be able to, operate. So they have no option but to go to these loan sharks. So non-interest finance or non-interest bank is the solution to this problem, right? It is a solution to this problem. It's an alternative, right? But it could also be the mainstream, right, one day. And I believe that, the conventional banks should start looking at creating non-interest, solutions to consumers without necessarily attaching any religious sentiment to, this product. Because if you look at some of the developed countries, like the UK, for instance, right, the majority of the people that live in the UK are Christians, right? Muslims are in the minority. But if you count the number of Islamic finance products that have been issued by the UK government in terms of number, in terms of value, it's way more than what we have done here in Nigeria, where we've got about 50% of the population to be Muslims. So that is to tell you that the people that value non-interest finance value it not necessarily from the religious perspective, but they value it from the perspective of its contribution to economic development and economic growth. So the situation that we're currently facing in Nigeria, I believe that the conventional banks, private institutions, right, financial institutions should start looking at ways through which they can create non-interest financing solutions to their consumers, right? And that way, they will be creating a win-win situation, right, for both parties. And of course, this is also a message to the non-interest banks and the non-interest financial institutions that they need to up their game, right? Because this is actually the time for us to promote non-interest banking services. This is the time for us to promote non-interest financing solutions. When the economy is in quagmire, when the populace is facing economic recession, right, the best alternative to solving our problem is to start looking for ways to invest in real assets. And that is what non-interest finance promotes. if you remember in 2008, 2009, during the global economic recession, right, most financial institutions, were brought down to their knees. But the institutions that were able to withstand this recession were institutions that invested in real assets, right? Institutions and even countries, right, that were already adopting non-interest financing, solution. So that is what I'm going to say to the conventional institutions, and of course also to the non-interest financial institutions. Let us start creating more Islamic finance products to the consumers.
Honestly, Mr. Ridwan, Islamic finance is the best option for Nigerians because of its principles. Absolutely. Islamic finance is the best option. Absolutely. Thank you very much for those insights. So as we wrap up the conversation, with the exposure to adverse socioeconomic issues like high interest rates and poor economic planning, high taxation, high inflation, and bad governance, how can Nigerians diversify their investments in the non-interest finance market?
Okay, to be honest, Bukola, this is a good question. At the same time, we also need to realize that many Nigerians today cannot even save, talk less of invest. Do you understand? Because, as a finance coach, I meet several people, right? And one of the questions that I get asked often is the question about saving. Of course, I also get questions about investment every single day, but the question about saving. And I understand because, for instance, if you earn a decent income of maybe 150,000, 200,000 naira a month, depending on your lifestyle, of course, it's difficult that individual to save every month. If you can't save, then how can you start living? Do you understand my point? Right? So we need to tackle the issue of saving first before we even begin to look at the issue of investing. Right? So how can these individuals begin to save so that they will be in a better position to be able to invest? And it goes back to what I said earlier. It is very critical for us to look at how Nigerians can even start saving before they can start investing, because you can't invest if you do not save, right? And many Nigerians today find it difficult to save, right? And not necessarily because of their lifestyle, even though some people live excessive lifestyle, but because of the economic condition. So some people earn decent income of, say, 150,000 naira, 200,000 naira per month, right? But they still find it difficult to save. And it speaks to what I said earlier, that people should start looking for means to multiply their income streams, right? Build your income streams. Do not depend on one single, income. Now, speaking of investment, right? Alternative investment for non-interest.
Even quite high inflation prices.
Right. So there are quite a number of, alternative investments that, ethical investors or halal investors can tap into. For a start, right, what I would usually advise people to do is whatever investment you want to put your funds in, for it to be worthwhile, it has to be the returns on investment, right, has to be higher than the inflation rate in the economy. For instance, if I'm investing in a fund and then the return on investment has been projected to be about 15% to 16%, right? And inflation is currently about 16.82% in Nigeria. Now, guess what? The returns that I would have earned on that investment would be nothing because inflation has wiped out that gain on my investment. So that's the first thing that you need to take into cognizance. So it's not just about investing. You also need to look for the right vehicle that would ensure that the returns you are earning on that investment is higher than the inflation rate. And this is where some investors have issues investing in certain products in Nigeria. Because if I'm investing in a fund, right, and then the returns is about 14% or 13%, right? This investment is not helping me to meet up with high inflationary pressures. One, now the naira income that I would have earned on this investment would have been wiped out by the increasing exchange rate. Do you understand? So I am being affected by a whole lot of economic factors on my investments. So that's why I always advise investors, start looking to invest in foreign investments. So what are the alternative options for people to invest in foreign assets? One of them would obviously be real estate, right? Which is a good, stable investment. So if you earn about 10%.
Are you talking about Islamic real estate?
Oh yeah, of course, Islamic real estate. Of course, it has to be Islamic real estate. I mean, and on a lighter note, many Halal investors prefer it, even if they don't, use the Islamic finance terminologies like musharaka, murabaha. But most times, right, Halal investors are comfortable investing in real estate, right? So you could, invest in a real estate fund. In fact, you don't necessarily have to even look for a real estate fund, right? You could, invest in a community. So if you've got colleagues at work, you have friends, in your neighborhood, come together, right? Look for a property manager, right? In a country that's income. Before you know it, in a year, you probably would have earned about 9%, 10% rental income. And then in about 3, 4, 5 years, right, the property itself would have appreciated. And then you'll be able to sell, right? And then move on to buy another property. So that's what I'm going to advise, investors to start doing. You have to be proactive, right? This is not a time for you to be looking for, what's it called, foreign investments that people are just churning out on the internet. You have to be very proactive. Look for people that can help you to manage your investment, right, in foreign countries. Okay, so that's one. Real estate is a very good option. The other one that I also believe would be a good option for Halal investors is foreign stocks, right? Even though the global stock market is crashing, but of course, I mean, it will definitely pick up because that is the pattern. It crashes, it recovers, it crashes, and then it recovers. And this is the best time for anyone who wants to invest in foreign stocks to invest right now, because the prices of these stocks have crashed, right? And you buy when the prices are low, and then you sell when the prices are high. So now that the prices of stocks are low, this is the best time for you to invest. Now, before you begin to invest in any of these assets, the first thing that you need to do is to learn about investment. Learn about investments. Learn about what you want to invest in. For instance, you can't make good enough money on investing in foreign stocks if you don't know what stocks are, if you don't know how to even screen halal stocks, if you don't know the apps that can help you identify halal stocks. So invest in yourself. Second thing that I would also advise people to do is to talk to experts, right? Talk to people that are already doing what you want to do. Okay, so that way you will be pointed to the right direction. You're not going to get lost, and you will also not lose your money. So, says that I think Halal investors can have, real estate and foreign stocks. Of course, there are other ones like the NFTs, the cryptos, but I think these ones are too sophisticated for the average retail investor. Start with these ones, and in a matter of time, you start making good money in foreign currency.
Yes, non-interest finance does not have a significant effect on risk-adjusted returns. Investors should continue to leverage this alternative form of financing and avoid leaving their capital idle. Thank you so much, Mr. Ridwan, for talking to us this morning on Islamic Finance Weekly. We appreciate your intervention and have a nice day.
Right. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. And that will be all for today's edition on the Islamic Finance Weekly. To watch more videos on Islamic finance, read our articles, log on to www.proshare.co. You can as well follow us on all our social media platforms displaying on the screen. Many thanks for watching. See you next week Friday for another episode.